I couldn't think of a better way to start our School of Public Health Grand Rounds than today with the Institute of Security's invited guest. Jan Poppendieck is one of our very old friends and young forever, but also tackling a topic of great interest and tremendous public health significance, and has been for many decades, not just in the United States, but globally. She is going to be introduced appropriately by Nick, but nonetheless, I enthusiastically welcome her, and as a pediatrician, but also as a parent. I'm very, very proud by her advocacy over the years and her translation of the mangled and complex federal regulations that have sometimes been good in certain ways and maybe not so good in other ways, including our infinite struggle with school lunch and what it is for children and families and what it is in terms of its health implications. So we have a champion today inaugurating our public health grand rounds, and that's the way it should start, with a champion, with a bang. So we welcome you here, and we hope that this will be a very valuable tool to many of us listening to you and learning from you, that can be incorporated in many ways throughout our careers in public health. And welcome here. But I would like to introduce my very dear friend Nick Freudenberg, who will do the official introduction. This was just an unofficial friendly welcome.
Thank you, Ayman. And it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure for the CUNY Urban Food Policy Institute to relaunch the Public Health Grand Rounds in our new facility. Our institute is an academic research and action center located here in the School of Public Health, and we provide evidence to inform municipal policies that promote equitable access to healthy, affordable food. We apply an intersectoral perspective that links nutrition and health to sustainable community development and workforce development, and we engage partners from city government, community organizations, and the university in food policy, research, and action. A few of our commitments are: one, to have a very sharp focus on health inequalities and the role of food in contributing to and reducing health inequalities. A second focus is on cities and the particular food issues that urban populations, especially here in New York City, but also in other parts of the United States and around the world, including in middle and low income nations. And finally, and I think appropriate for our talk this evening, we're firmly committed to link the two sides of the food equation, undernutrition and overnutrition, diet-related diseases, and food insecurity. Jan Poppendieck, who will speak this evening, is a senior faculty fellow at the CUNY Urban Food Policy Institute and a professor emerita of sociology at Hunter College and the Graduate Center. She was the co-founder, with others, of our food policy group, initially when we were based at Hunter College, and here at the School of Public Health. Her primary concerns, both as a scholar and as an activist, are poverty, hunger, and food assistance here in the United States. She's the author of Breadlines Knee-Deep in Wheat, Food Assistance in the Great Depression, published in 1986, and again in 2014. Of Sweet Charity, Emergency Food and the End of Entitlement, published in 1998 and 1999, and Free for All, Fixing School Food in America, published in 2010. And that received a 2000 Book of the Year award from the Association for the Study of Food and Society. And she's also a recipient at the 2011 James Beard Foundation Leadership Award. So with that, I will turn it over to Jan, and thank you so much for joining us, Jan, and giving us a talk.
Thank you.
Let me just say, this link up here is for the evaluation, and we'll put it up again at the end of the session, and we're hoping all of you will go to this site and give us some feedback on this session so that we can make them even better in the future. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me, but particularly for inviting the CUNY Urban Food Policy Institute to inaugurate this season's Grand Rounds. And I want to thank Professors Nick Freudenberg and Nevin Cohen and the rest of the Institute staff for inviting me to do this. Grand Rounds sounds very impressive to a sociology professor, and a little intimidating to someone outside the health field. 40 years in a sociology department, I'm skeptical of labels, and I'm guessing it's less impressive to those of you who have attended many before, but it's sure going to look nice on my resume. What I want to do with my time today is to try to convince you that the way we pay for school meals in the United States is a public health issue. Okay, I've called my talk The Public Health Case for Universal Free School Meals. But I'm going to start by saying what's wrong with the current means-tested approach. And I'll just assume that means-tested is part of the language for public health as it is in social policy and sociology, those programs for which you qualify by having a particularly low income or an income below a threshold. So what I'm going to do is, as I say, first I'm going to review what's wrong with the way we do it now, and then I'm going to try to make the case that public health principles and public health ethics sort of obligate you to get involved in trying to change this. And then I'm going to talk briefly about some current opportunities for you to intervene. Okay, so there is a premise that's kind of underlying this whole talk, and that is the premise that healthy, nutritious, appealing food at school served in an atmosphere that promotes both digestion and civility is primary prevention, both in the immediate term and in the formation of habits and preferences for the long term. So if you cannot imagine school food being healthy, appetizing, and civil, you may be excused. I certainly don't have to convince this audience of the health consequences of poor diet. And in fact, it's the opposite. I have been learning from you, from my colleagues in the Institute, and prior to that in the center, about the consequences of diet for health. I know that when school food was initiated in the United States, the focus was on addressing hunger, undernutrition. Over the years, we've come to see school food also as a vehicle for substituting healthier choices for the choices that young people are often making when left to their own devices. I don't want to overstate this. There are still children all over America and children in our own city for whom the basic fuel of school food is essential to getting by. Students who these may be the only complete meals that they get during a week, school lunch and school breakfast. But school meals can promote health regardless of the income of the family. I did take a look at the Healthy Eating Index just to kind of remind myself of why this is so important. And it was interesting to note that in a comparison of children, seniors, and the total population using the Healthy Eating Index in 2011-12, children had the lowest score. Children were the group with the least good diet. They scored 55 compared to 59 for the total population, and 68.29 for my group, the senior citizens. It was an improvement over the assessments that had been done in 2007, 2008. So perhaps we're making progress, but our children's diet is certainly an issue of national concern. So what's wrong with the way we do school food, the way we pay for school food now? I just want to run over it, just out of curiosity, how many people in this room have or have had children in the public schools? Okay, so a lot of people are familiar with the school lunch application that you may have received that asks you to identify your household size and family income. We have established 3 tiers. There are free meals, lunches and breakfasts. There are reduced price meals, which typically in the United States is a 40-cent lunch and a 30-cent breakfast. So it's not just a little discount. It is a substantial benefit. And then there are what are called full price or paid meals, which it's a big misnomer because there's actually a federal subsidy of 37 cents in cash and 32 cents in commodities for each of those so-called full price meals. But in order to qualify for free, your household income needs to be below 130% of the federal poverty line, and that would be $26,208 for annually for a mom and 2 kids, a household of 3. And reduced price, that 40-cent lunch, it's less actually in New York City, but nationally that's the average, is up to 185% of the poverty line, so that's $37,296 for that mom and 2 kids for a family of 3. The full price, which in New York City is $1.75, is the cost of a paid meal, is on average nationally around $2.40. So that's what you can purchase a school meal for. In New York City, about 3 years ago, we eliminated the reduced price charge. Okay, we still have to classify students as free, reduced price, or full price, because we are entitled only for reduced price eligible students only to the federal reimbursement for reduced price meals, which is 40 cents less than the federal reimbursement for full price lunches. So we still have to classify the students, but we no longer attempt to collect the 40 cents, or in New York it was 25 cents, because a study revealed that not only was that charge deterrent for some kids in need, but also that it basically didn't pay for itself because of the amount of paperwork and rigmarole involved. So what's wrong with this way of paying for school food? I call this the 7 deadly ins of the school food means test. You've all heard of the 7 deadly sins. Well, these are the 7 deadly ins. And I want to start with the one that moves me most, which is the indignity. The 3-tier system stigmatizes the students who eat at free or reduced price simply by creating 3 levels of eligibility based on family income. The system creates the conditions in which some students can look down on others. When I was researching this, I was teaching a lot of big sections of Social 101 at Hunter, where I taught for many decades. And as a hedge against plagiarism, really, I typically had students in a large section write an essay in class on the first day. Okay, so therefore I had a kind of writing sample, and it alerted me if I began to get papers that didn't sound at all like those initial writing samples. So when I got interested in school food, I started asking Hunter students to write about their school food memories. And boy, did I get an eye-opener. I'm just going to quote one, although I received many such comments. A student wrote, depending on what type of money your parents made, you would either receive lunch for free or be charged. At lunchtime, many students would chastise others for receiving free lunch. If you received free, it symbolized poor, unwealthy. Schools have, and school systems have taken significant steps, and in some cases expensive steps, to try to protect the privacy of students who are eating free or at reduced price. There are PIN numbers and swipe cards and what have you. But my contention is that just by setting it up as an income-linked program, it creates this condition, and students have a way of figuring out who's eating free. The problem is very much aggravated in schools that have separate a la carte lines. While I was working on this book, I spent an idyllic semester at UC Santa Cruz. I think we had one tree at Hunter. It's kind of in the subway well when it grows out there. In UC Santa Cruz, there was a mountain lion alert on the from the back country to feast on the deer that roamed the campus. So it was a very, very different setting. And I encourage you, if you ever have a chance to visit, do so. Just it's extraordinarily beautiful. But anyway, California is different, and partly it's different because of the temperature, the year-round outdoor inviting climate for much of the state. And I had students there also write their school food memories for me. And as one of the students wrote, the cafeteria was for the poor kids. Kids who did not eat in the cafeteria were embarrassed to go into it during lunch for fear that others would think they were getting a free lunch. So I said, this is very much a California phenomenon because the other kids went to kiosks and stands and what have you, got their lunch and went outdoors to eat. It would have been fun to go to high school in California. But then to complete the circle, students who do qualify for the free meal become embarrassed as they grow into the more socially aware years and don't want to be seen as free lunch participants. As one student from Rhode Island recalled for me, I was eligible for free, but I was embarrassed and annoyed my mom for pizza money. Even the students who are able to ignore these attitudes sometimes, I think, eat a meal that's seasoned by shame. And I do believe that the stigma that is attached to school food kind of filters into the food itself. I remember a food service manager in a big school, Bayard Rustin, down, I think it's in Chelsea, showing me with great frustration the boxes from which she was unpacking items that were going to be part of the school lunch. And then she said, I bring the students in here and I show them that these are the exact same things that they are buying at the corner store, but they don't want it because it's school food. So once we've characterized the program as mostly for poor people, sort of for poor people, the kids who can distance themselves from that, who are seeking ways to distinguish themselves, will reject it. And in New York City, where we have 1.1 million children in school, we have 250,000 children, 250,000 on any typical day, who are eligible for free meals, who are not eating them. So we are failing to reach an enormous segment of our population. Okay, so that in is indignity, and I promise you that the other ins aren't quite as long. I want to move on to inefficiency. Schools must distribute and collect applications, verify a sample of the applications, certify students to the appropriate categories on the basis of the applications, communicate this certification to the food service operator, who must then assign each meal to its appropriate reimbursement category, tally the meals in each category, and submit these results to the district office, which must in turn aggregate them and submit claims to the state agency for reimbursement. The state agency in turn must forward the claims and documentation to the federal agency. Meanwhile, both the state agency and the federal government regularly conduct audits to make sure that these procedures are being followed properly. So you can get a sense of the complexity of the regulations that govern this. This is an expensive and highly inefficient way to go about feeding children at school. When Philadelphia developed an alternate approach based on demographic data in the late 1980s, they had a waiver to conduct a study. Evaluators estimated that schools saved 15 minutes per child in distributing and processing applications. This came to 20,480 hours or 10 years of staff time, about one staff year for every 14 schools in the pilot project. It's an expense. We are paying a lot to distinguish among our children on the basis of their family income. There is a process called direct certification, which is a relative newcomer in this world of school food payment. And direct certification has reduced the paperwork burden for schools that have large populations of low-income children. Under direct certification, agencies that administer SNAP, TANF, or the Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations send schools lists of children who are categorically eligible for those programs, so those families don't have to apply. So if that application gets lost in the backpack on the way home or is not returned by the parent, the child's eligibility is still established. And this also applies to children, children in foster care, runaway, migrant, and homeless youth, and children in Head Start. So those are all categorically eligible. But other low-income families that are not participating in one of these programs and families seeking the reduced price category must still use the paper applications, or now electronically online. You can file an application. Okay, so the third in here is inaccuracy. At nearly every point in the chain that extends from the classroom teacher distributing the application forms until the federal government audits the state accounts, there are possibilities for error. And error rates in school food are really phenomenally high. The federal government collects and studies error rates under the rubric of erroneous payments. Okay, they're worried about paying for a meal for someone who didn't qualify, or reimbursing at too high a rate. Recently, more than 1 in 5 applicants was subject to an erroneous payment. This was a combination of those who were receiving a smaller benefit than they were entitled to, okay, who should have been eligible for free or reduced price, and those who were being overpaid. So that's a really high error rate. I think you would recognize that on the face of it. Of great concern from the perspective of the nation's efforts to end childhood hunger, more than 1/3 of those denied benefits were found to have been denied erroneously. And the same factors that contribute to the possibility of errors in individual cases also mean that the data overall for schools and for districts is not very reliable data. I'm grateful to Nevin for sending me a memo, and I'm happy to report that New York State is beginning to consider some other approaches to categorizing schools, because the free and reduced price application data is full of errors. The fourth in here is insecurity, leaving food insecure children behind. Even when the process is accurate, children in real need may be denied free or reduced price meals. That's because in today's economy, an income of 185% of the federal poverty threshold is simply not a guarantee of sufficiency. A recent USDA study found that fully 1/5 of the households with the most severe form of food insecurity, that's households in which children themselves experienced food insecurity, had incomes above the cutoff for reduced price meals. So I'm sure that you've taken a look at the poverty line and said to yourself, this isn't realistic for life in our city. There are built-in reasons based on the assumptions on which the poverty line is created that make it get less and less and less realistic every year. So the fifth in here is inequity. Not only is 185% of poverty not a guarantee of sufficiency, but it has different meaning in different places. When policy analysts talk about equity in programs or inequity, they talk about two kinds, horizontal and vertical. And horizontal inequity means that you're not treating people who are in the same real situation alike. And in school food, that means that the 130% of poverty cutoff includes a much larger segment of the community in a small town in rural Georgia where the cost of living is quite low than it does in a large city in the Northeast. So one reason the programs work a lot better in the Southeast, and that historically the Southeast has been the bulwark of school meal programs, is because the standards fit there better and the reimbursement rate goes much further because the cost of living is lower and therefore labor costs are lower. A family of 4 in Tucson, where the cost of living is 98.8% of the national average, might be able to afford the reduced price meals at an income of $45,000, over the threshold for a family of 4. But a similar family in Boston, where the cost of living is 139.5% of the national average, or Brooklyn, where it's 180% of the national average, families in these high cost of living areas are unlikely to be able to afford to pay for the school meals. And we see that in New York City, where families are under pressure of housing costs and gentrification and struggling to make ends meet. And universal free school meals would help to ease those tight family benefits. There's also an issue of vertical inequity, and that occurs when you look at the structure of means-tested programs. Okay, most means-tested programs have a whole series of steps, and the benefit is reduced as you approach an income cutoff. It gets smaller and smaller. In school food, there's just 3 levels. No benefit, although, as I say, it is subsidized, but anyway, no benefit, a reduced price benefit, or a free meal. And this means that you're not treating people fairly in relationship to each other. If you're $5 or 50 cents over the income threshold, you get no benefit at all. And this generates a lot of, I don't know if you could call it envy, but anger among parents whose income puts them over the line, and probably a lot of misstatement of income. Making more tiers, however, which you would do if you were creating a typical means-tested program, will not solve the problem here, because schools are so ill-equipped to administer a means test, and it is so contrary to the spirit of schools in a democratic society. We want parents coming in. We want parent engagement. We want people to feel at home in the school and welcome. We don't want them feeling like they owe money. So this leads to my 6th in, which is inhospitableness. School is the first institution that many children encounter outside the home. For the first time, they interact with, on a regular basis, with strangers and people who are not members of their family. By selling food instead of serving it, the school surrenders one of its most powerful tools for creating a nurturing and welcoming environment. And if you've ever had a chance to visit a kindergarten or 1st grade class in a school that does have universal free meals, and I'll get to that in a moment, how we have some schools that have it, and that has breakfast in the classroom, you've maybe been able to see this effective welcoming with food at work. The need to assign each meal to its proper reimbursement category has slowed the cafeteria line and created a series of distressing events in the cafeteria. One of the great things about being affiliated with the Institute is that Ashley and Nevin and Nick and other staff people send me things that are relevant when they see them. And the other day, Ashley sent me a video of a school cafeteria worker resigning because she had, for the 2nd time, been required to take a tray away from a child when the child reached the cashier, because that child's parents owed. Schools will typically let a child charge 3 meals, and then they're supposed to be given what has come to be called a stigma sandwich, technically an alternate meal, but a cheese sandwich or a peanut butter sandwich if they're not allergic to peanut butter. And with the idea of getting the message home that the bill is overdue. But if the child reaches the cashier with the tray, you can't use that food again. Okay, it's been, so the cashier was required to confiscate the tray, and there are accounts of it being dumped within the child's site. So This is in a way an outgrowth of our efforts to protect the privacy. This happens especially in schools that have the PIN numbers and the swipe cards, because that's how parents have come to be putting money on account rather than handing the kid $1.75 each day. I used these 7 deadly ends with a large group of school food service workers at a conference a couple of years ago, shortly after Free for All was published. And I asked them which deadly end bothered them the most, and this was the one. Okay, they mostly like kids. They're in that work partly because they like kids and they want to feed kids, and being required to enforce this. I want to end with a final end, and I'll call it inappropriateness. In order to appreciate the full impact of the 3-tier reimbursement system in comparison with the universal approach, it's important to understand that the need to sell food to paying students is part of what has driven the school food menu toward what I think of as carnival food or fast food clones. Because you're trying to keep the paying kids in the program, you want to offer their favorite foods, and you may want to beef up those, wrong verb, enhance those favorite foods with the hidden nutrients. There is now a visibly white whole grain rich flour that you make your pizza crust from, what have you. But the need to market foods to children is part of what has driven the menu away from health. Another great thing about being at the CUNY Urban Food Policy Institute is our YOFI, Youth Food Educators Project, where we are, Jarita is here, where we are training young people. It started in East Harlem, and I think it's expanding now to other parts of Upper Manhattan, to do counter-marketing, to resist, to deconstruct the messages that come from mainstream marketers, and to do counter-marketing. But meanwhile, the food service director is trying to plan a menu that appeals to kids who have been subjected to billions of dollars of advertising for the nation's least healthy food. So it kind of puts advertisers, in a sense, in charge of the school food menu. So what would universal meals look like? It would look like bus transportation or textbooks. When I started my research on school food, I ran across some figures on bus transportation costs, which unfortunately I didn't hang on to, but it was about $600 a year per child in the community that I was looking at, and that would more than feed a child lunch and breakfast for the 180 or so days of the school days of the year. We don't have nowhere in the nation are parents of means asked to pay for bus transportation. It's provided as a and we don't charge for textbooks anymore. Okay, that went out probably 80 years ago, but we still feel that we somehow or other need to charge for food. If I just want to, the potential of universal goes beyond addressing the deadly ends that I've laid out, because if we had universal free school meals, we could integrate school food with the curriculum. Food education could become a crucial part of the school day. I think we're all, this is an audience that knows how urgent the need for food education is. The cafeteria could become, in a sense, our largest classroom. If school food were offered free to all, free for all, it would quickly become the norm, not overnight. Okay, kids who've been socialized into this one-upsmanship 3-tier, some people are better than others, they have to graduate and move on. It's actually 13 years since I started systematic research on school food. So all of the kids who were entering pre-K the year I sat down to launch this project have graduated by now, unless they got kept back. I think we have to understand that it won't happen overnight, but that it will in fact happen. So In terms of the public health principles, and I should tell you that I turned to a document that was produced by the Public Health Leadership Society, and it was a code of ethics for public health practitioners and a exploration of the values that underlay those code of ethics principles. So first, I just want to say what I've learned from hanging out in a school of public health, having been so long in a department of sociology, is to look for population-wide solutions. You know, iodize the salt. Oh, probably salt is now. Maybe that's not such a good example to use, but fortify the flour. In any case, do something that will change the environment for all members of the population. And school food is such an opportunity to feed our children well and help them develop healthy habits and healthy preferences and tastes. The other thing I guess I've absorbed from hanging out in a school of public health is the idea that prevention is better than treatment if you can get there first. So with that as background, I want to turn to three of the principles from the Public Health Leadership Society document. First, human beings have a right to the resources necessary for health. Schools represent a massive potential delivery system for those resources. And when I think about the resources necessary for health, I mean both the food and the knowledge about food. The second is public health policies, programs, and priorities should be developed and evaluated through processes that ensure an opportunity for input from the community members. And among the community members whose input ought to be respected and solicited are the people who run these programs on a day-to-day basis. I think one of the things that distressed me most in my close-up immersion in the world of school food was the attitude toward school food service personnel that it's kind of like they're the help. One food service director in Vermont said to me, well, you don't have legs. The kids see, you know, they're going along with the counter and they're pushing their tray along, and they see from your chin to your waist, perhaps, you're not a whole person. People felt unheard. And food service personnel have been absolutely consistent for, let's see, 71 years, 70 years since the National School Lunch Program was created in 1946, of arguing that we should feed all children as a regular part of the school day. And we need to listen to them. Another group that I think we ought to be listening to are parents. And when we get to the end section, the opportunities for change, I want to direct you to a place where you can see the stance of parents here in New York City on this issue through the official parent leadership structure that the Department of Education has created. And finally, the principle, which is number 9 on the sort of official code of ethics, public health programs and policies should be implemented in a manner that most enhances the physical and social environment. And in the context of social environment, I'd like to call your attention to the third of the values that are specified in this document, values and beliefs underlying the code. It says humans are inherently social and interdependent. Humans look to each other for companionship in friendships, families, and community, and rely upon one another for safety and survival. Positive relationships among individuals and positive collaborations among institutions are signs of healthy community. Each person's actions affect other people. And the potential for positive interactions in the school cafeteria, in the dining room, or in the classroom where meals are being consumed in the classroom is actually enormous. I'm just curious, how many people here ever went to summer camp? Do you have positive memories of the dining hall, of the food? In most summer camps, the meals are a highlight of the day. Meals in our schools could be that social glue, that social cement. They don't have to be a separation of people. The school food means test undermines positive relationships among students and creates opportunities for teasing and bullying. here in New York, where we have a campaign underway, and I'm going to cut ahead to that, I think. Students have written very powerfully of their experience of being bullied around the issue of consuming a free or reduced price lunch. Okay, so is universal pie in the sky? Okay, so this is in some ways public health. I'm preaching to the choir, I think, in some sense here. But is it pie in the sky? And I want to say no. There's been a substantial progress. Provision 2 was created in 1977 and has been an option since 1980, and that has enabled some schools, typically schools with a very high percentage of free and reduced price eligible students, to opt to collect the applications in a base year and then apply the percentages for the next 4 years. And that is, there are many complications with using it and problems associated with it, but it has enabled some schools in the United States to serve meals free to all youngsters. It's also evidence of serious congressional interest in reducing the paperwork burden, and I think that's our best hope in a way for moving this along. Then the second big development has been direct certification, which I mentioned to you, where welfare agencies provide schools with lists. And again, those were pilot programs in the early 1990s, and by 2004, Congress required all schools and school districts to move toward direct certification. And then finally, we have the community eligibility provision or program, which is part of the 2010 Child Nutrition Reauthorization, which is called the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act. And that's the act that got a lot of attention in health circles because it substantially upgraded the standards, the nutrition standards for school meals. No more monochromatic meals. Okay. Under the new standards, you've got to have some green in there and what have you. But in that same act was the creation of, as I say, the community eligibility provision. And if you want to know the details, you can ask me during Q&A because it takes a while. Responding to evidence is another one of the public health principles that I might have chosen as part of this argument, and I do want to say that the evidence base on the impact of the community eligibility option is still limited, but it was rolled out gradually, 3 states in the first year, but in those 3 states, participation rose 13% at lunch and 25% at breakfast. And in the world of school food, participation is the key. As a food service director said to me, well, if they don't eat it, it doesn't do them any good. They don't participate. So hopefully I've convinced you that this is public health business, and therefore I want to talk about 2 levels of opportunities for intervention. The first is the Child Nutrition Reauthorization. Child Nutrition Act was passed in 1966 and created the school breakfast program, what became the Child and Adult Care Food Program, the Summer Meals Program, sort of everything but the original National School Lunch. So it's going to have its 50th birthday on October 11th. So that means, for instance, school breakfast will be 50 years old on October 11th. But child nutrition has to be reauthorized theoretically every 5 years. It's a complicated legal situation because if Congress doesn't get around to it, it doesn't stop because the authorizations are permanent for some of the programs. But in any case, they didn't do it last year when they should have done it. And so they're trying to do it now. And in the House, there is a terrible bill. And I'm just going to quickly summarize what makes it so bad. First off, in terms of the community eligibility option or program, it severely restricts the number of schools and school districts that would be eligible to do this. Some 7,000 schools that have already implemented it would be required to stop and go back to collecting paper applications and reinstituting meal charges, and another 18,000 who are eligible for this program but have not implemented it. 11,000 of those would not be eligible to do it. So it would be a tremendous loss. Secondly, the House bill contains a block grant provision that it would be a pilot. They would experiment with a child nutrition block grant in 3 states for people who pay attention to the way in which these programs, federal programs, interact with local budgets. That sends a huge alarm bell. Okay, that's what happened to welfare. And that's why so few families are now assisted, because the block grant loses value every year from inflation and it's unable to respond to fluctuations in need. So even though it's just a pilot for 3 states, it's a foot in the door, and the anti-hunger wing of the school food community is intensely concerned about this. And then finally, there would be an increase in verification requirements. And typically what happens when you increase verification requirements, verification, there's an alarm. It tells you when you've when you've exhausted your time. But I will just say to families requesting that they bring documentation of the income that they stated on the application. And there have been some studies of what happens, and typically only about half the families respond. So conservatives kind of say, oh, well, that's because the other half were cheating, and they can't prove that low income that they listed on their application. But fortunately, Mathematica, good old Mathematica down there near Princeton, did a very careful study following up with families who had failed to respond to verification requests. And they found that, wait a minute, I'm never good with numbers, that 51% were in fact eligible for the free meals, and another 26% were eligible for reduced price. So less than a quarter of the families where benefits had been terminated, the kids had been kicked off the program, no more free lunches for you, were in fact eligible. There are many reasons why parents don't respond to a verification request, including having informal income, no pay stubs, you name it, and in a city with a high immigrant population, a great fear of interacting with authorities. So to pay attention to what's happening with the child nutrition reauthorization at the federal level, go to the FRAC website, Food Research and Action Center, go in the legislative action category, and you can keep up with this, and you can know where and when to send your letters, emails, phone calls, what have you. Locally, things are a little clearer in that the CUNY Urban Food Policy Institute is an active partner in the Lunch for Learning campaign. And this is the one place where I wish I had brought a slide, but you can do this. It's lunch4learningnyc.org.
We'll also put it on our website.
Okay, and Nick will put it on our website tomorrow, or someone will. This is an active campaign to get universal free school meals in New York City. We have it in standalone middle schools. And what I mean by standalone middle schools are schools that have grades 6, 7, and 8, but not for middle school students in pre-K through 8 or 6 through 12, which makes it very difficult to advertise this option and get the word out about it. The chancellor allowed this or supported this as part of her middle school initiative. Participation has increased in schools where this has been begun, but the mayor has been unwilling to set aside a minuscule amount of money. Okay, so who am I to say $20 million is a minuscule amount of money? It's 0.0001% of the $26 billion New York City Department of Education budget. For a mere $20 million, we could be feeding all our kids at school, and or at least making it available to all our kids. The estimate is that eventually about 120,000 additional kids would eat. It would create about 1,000 new jobs, and we want them to be, where's more, good food jobs. And they are good food jobs, and they're jobs on the school calendar, which is especially important to single parents. So that's an important side effect. So I urge you to go to the Lunch for Learning website and look for it says campaign materials and read the pediatrician letter, which we connected with a pediatrician actually through the class that Nick and I taught three years ago. And there's also a parent letter, which I think will, if you go back to thinking about the public health principle that programs should be developed and evaluated with input from the people most affected, and the student letter, and hopefully these will inspire you to write your own letters to the mayor and tell him that it's time. And now I think we can have questions.
Thank you so much, Jan. I think Jan's talk illustrated the approach of our institute, which is to look in depth at the practices and policies of all the places where food occurs in our society, and to look for opportunities for reducing hunger and food insecurity, or reducing diet-related diseases. And we think it's that kind of analysis that can make major contributions to improving health, not only here in New York City, but in other parts. Question for Jan. Yes?
Thank you very much. Wonderful talk. My question is, thank you very much. It was a wonderful talk. Can you turn it around and just talk a little bit about the political barriers to making universal school lunches, both at the federal level and the local level, probably the more federal level, but in terms of what industries, to what extent are there industries that are profiting from having these divisions, and ideologically, that is first, I guess that's the question. So what are the industries that benefit from this if there are? Second, has the ideological framing changed at the federal level? In other words, is the message about prevention, the message about food is prevention, and therefore better health and less cost? Is that being used, and is that effective?
Okay, good question, or good pair of questions. And just, it's like an advertisement before I answer the question. The list of 7 deadly inns will also be on the CUNY Urban Food Policy website. Not all the explication, but just a brief version.
CUNYUrbanFoodPolicy.org.
Yeah, that's us. But the question about the barriers to going for universal at the national level, your question of who benefits from the status quo, that's the question we ask in sociology departments, so it makes me feel right at home. But in fact, on the school food front, it's not primarily industries that and food manufacturers, for instance. They actually benefit more if we expand the program. The more kids that eat, the more paper cups and trays and pita pockets and what have you they can sell. So at the federal level, the barriers, I think, are fiscal and ideological, and those two are so intertwined. So much of our ideology is a kind of distorted perception about what it means to spend money, to think in terms of costs and not in terms of investment. And that gets to the second part of your question about the arguments based on health and prevention. We could probably save money in the long run. As someone who's spent a lot of time with the history of school food, I can tell you that the cutbacks of the Reagan era, the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act that cut so many social programs, impacted school food in a way that drove school food operators toward, as I say, the carnival foods, the monochromatic meals, the kids' favorite foods, because when the Reagan cuts came in, the price of school food had to rise for the paying students, and it lost a quarter of its paying customers, the National School Lunch Program, in the 2 years subsequent to those cuts. And in an effort to get those kids back into the cafeteria, schools began selling lots of fries and tater tots and nuggets and what have you. So the opposite of prevention. So yeah, I think we can make the case that making school food civil, destigmatizing it, making it part of school will enable more children to enjoy it, participate in it, learn preferences for healthy food. School food has gotten much better, okay? Not universal, oops, wrong term. Not everywhere. I'm sure you could still find me some monochromatic lunches, but there are a lot of dedicated people out there who are doing terrific things with menu. Perhaps some of you are involved or know of WITS here in New York, Wellness in the Schools, that has created an alternative menu and sends culinary graduates into the schools to work with the cooks. I visited a WITS school in one of the LISC project areas, and the food is great. So, but anyway, I hope I've answered the question.
Yes, in the front there.
Good afternoon. I work for school food for 23 years at George Washington High School, and I started in 1983. In 1983, the food was very nutritious. It had chicken, boxed chicken, cream chicken, take the fat, and all that stuff off the chicken. The bananas weren't thrown out; they were made into banana pudding, and children ate. I would say toward 2000, we started getting synthetic foods. The brand of what they were putting in, example, even the Jamaican patties, the meat was, I don't know, that was changing. So I think that changed the attitude of the children. But in that particular community, I found that the children didn't have the stigmas that you were talking about, but in certain other high schools, they did. So I just wanted to give you that as an example of the food that the wellness program is starting to bring in now. I'm going to give you credit for District Council 37. So I visit over, well, I've worked in several districts in Brooklyn and Manhattan, and I noticed that the wellness program basically is going back to the way it was in 1983. Why did it reverse in that direction? I think you mentioned the economics part and the politics.
Sure. You put your finger on it. The allocation, the federal reimbursement for a free lunch is now about $3.06. It's not really enough to produce a healthy meal. So there have been tremendous pressures toward cost cutting, and cost cutting has driven many school systems further and further toward manufactured school foods to, defrost and reheat food systems. There's been a turnaround. There are many more voices. One of the advantages of Universal that I forgot to talk about would be the engagement of a wider segment of parents in paying attention to the quality of school food. If you do salad bar comparisons in New York, you can see that where parents are engaged, the salad bars are a lot more appealing and fresher and more interesting than in communities where parents are maybe not so involved in school food. So, thank you.
Jan, I wonder if you could say something about other approaches to school food, and particularly talk a little about Brazil and some of their innovations in school food there as another model.
Okay, so Brazil feeds all children in the public schools free of charge. Brazil has a different distribution of public school versus private school, than they have a larger, in a sense, private school sector than the U.S. has, but they feed all the children in the public schools free of charge, and they have consciously seen this as an opportunity to build up the non-export agriculture sector. Okay, there's the export agriculture sector in Brazil that is often very large plantations and big ag. And then there's subsistence farming, family farming, small farming, and they actually legislated a percentage, and I don't ask me for numbers.
30%.
30% of the food for schools had to be purchased from smallholders, and they ran into some trouble because in the first couple of years they couldn't get enough to meet that requirement. They were making good progress until recent economic and political dislocations. So I think we have to wait and see how much of school food reform in Brazil survives the crises that they've been going through. But this awareness that how you procure food, positing a best value rather than lowest price approach with value defined with attention to impact on the environment and sustainability and on the economic survival of small farms and on the way in which farm labor is treated and that sort of thing. The idea of socially responsible procurement, I'm going to call it that, or socially and ecologically responsible procurement, is another part of what colleagues in Wales and the University of Cardiff have called the school food revolution, looking not just at the access to the meals for children, but also the impact of the procurement.
Other questions?
Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you also for giving voice. Your last point was about the showing the requirements and showing proof. The school where I work, many of the parents don't speak English, and so that would definitely have been a problem. And so I like that you mentioned that. So thank you so much. You mentioned many things that were wrong with our current school food system. If you were to meet with President Obama, Michelle Obama today, right, and there's so many steps, right, and President Obama said, I can do one of those things, what would you say is the most important to get started first?
So much as I would like to be able to talk about going back to scratch cooking on site and the wonderful effects that could have on the good food jobs sector, I would talk about universal, because I think it's the key to destigmatizing the program and integrating the program with the education system. And I have a funny story. I took a copy of my book I was a speaker at an event where chefs moved to schools as part of Let's Move. And we were all going to the White House lawn, and I took my copy of Free for All, Fixing School Food in America, and I was going to give it to Mrs. Obama, but I didn't get a chance, so I gave it to an aide. And about 2 weeks later, I got this thank you letter, and it said, Dear Dr. Poppendieck, thank you for your thoughtful gift of a book. And they didn't notice that I wrote the book. Anyway, and so she didn't hear me. I tried. I did. I do. I mean, someone asked what was the biggest barrier to universal, and I mentioned the fiscal constraints. Currently, slightly more than half the children in America's public schools are already eligible for free and reduced price. So even if everybody decided to eat the free school lunch once I got my way, it wouldn't break the bank. It's not unaffordable. It's just unaffordable if you're in the Senate Agriculture Committee and you have to get that money out of other programs that are under the jury. It's the pay-as-you-go, pay-go rules that govern so much of domestic spending that make it very difficult to make any leaps forward. Was that comprehensible?
Okay. I think we need to end. Jen, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Please do school dinner before you leave, and we look forward to seeing you at our next grand round. Can we put the evaluation link on again, and we encourage you in the hours to come to fill this out, please.